and welcome all you beautiful, beloved people. Now, let's get to the point. This is talk 4 of our 5 promised talks on separating from ego. In 2 weeks, we move into 5 talks on forgiveness, and then what? That's as far as we got, right? Forgiveness. Well, I'll tell you what then. We're doing 5 talks each on fear and guilt/shame, trust, surrendering, and awakening. Yeah, you've got to stay tuned and stay here if you want to keep learning transformative new ways to experience life. We're going to start off with some funny business today because we've been awfully serious lately. And so, let's lighten up a bit. You've earned it. So I thought this was cute. A DEA officer stopped at a ranch in Texas and talked with an old rancher. He told the rancher, "I need to inspect your ranch for illegally grown drugs." The rancher said, "Okay, but don't go in that field over there," as he pointed out the location. The DEA officer verbally exploded, saying, "Mister, I have the authority of the federal government with me." Reaching into his rear pants pocket, the arrogant officer removed his badge and proudly displayed it to the rancher. "See this badge? This badge means I'm allowed to go wherever I wish on any land. No questions asked or answers given. Have I made myself clear? Do you understand?" The rancher nodded politely and apologized and went about his chores. And a short time later, the old rancher heard loud screaming, looked up, and saw the DEA officer running for his life, being chased by the rancher's bull. With every step, the bull was gaining ground on the officer, and it seemed likely that he'd sure enough get gored before he reached safety. The officer was clearly terrified. Wouldn't you be? So the rancher threw down his tools, ran to the fence, and yelled at the top of his lungs, "Your badge! Show him your badge!" I thought that was cute. Here's one that my son Luke liked, and he's a very smart cookie, so his tastes are not everybody's, but I liked it. Nitrogen triiodide is a dark red inorganic compound that is so volatile that it has no commercial applications. It is so unstable that it will detonate violently due to random stray currents of air, the touch of a feather, or even a passing alpha particle. Yet it's still not as fragile as the human ego. And finally, an ego and superego walk into a bar. The bartender asks, "Let me see your ID," or id. In clinical psychology, the breakdown of ego, defined by Sigmund Freud, there is the id, superego, and ego. Superego is the critical one, the one that oversees it all, the one who keeps track of how to fit in with the world, how to stay safe, how to deal with all the potential stressors and stuff like that complicates things. It's the one that is carefully curated and holds in place that image we work so carefully to convince everyone that we embody. It's where our personality is rooted. The ego works between the superego of critical thinking and the id, trying to find the balance between the two. But today, the id is the one that's important. It's responsible for our primitive, impulsive, experiential desires. It says, "I want what I want, and I want it now." It's the one that a lot of folks who struggle with addiction have to stay on top of. And I'm talking about every conceivable kind of addiction, from shopping to beauty products to TV to social media to any and all form of consumables. And the id is blamed for a great many detrimental states of living. Now, all along this ego journey we've been on, we've talked about the masks, the facades, the falsity that ego is. But the id, that's the only part of the overall ego with no agenda other than to experience. The science of psychology says that the id is primitive, but I don't believe that that's always the case. I say that at the heart of things, the id is the true, pure self at the core of us. And I believe it's only detrimental when it's used within the construct of the self, the human, social, societal conditioning that we've created as our personality. I think it's only detrimental when it's used in the context of the individual, separate human experience in this day and age. And I say that it's a crucial component to keeping us in the now. A necessary piece we need on our path to enlightenment. And I've come to that idea because the id is only about now. All it wants is joy and wonder and excitement, and those are quite literally the only things one experiences when they fully step into the present. Even more so if they truly awaken. And so I believe that it's a part of the psyche through which we awaken into being. In Eckhart Tolle speak, into presence in Leonard Jacobson ease, into divinity in Holmesian, or as I like to call it, into bliss. Because I know that being totally in the present is nothing short of bliss. And it would seem that all of the great many teachers of this sort of thing, although each has a different way of describing that nowness, they're all in agreement. It is real. It is here. It's all that truly is. And it is only through shedding off the layers of ego that we experience it. But I haven't heard any of them say that maybe, just maybe, there's a part of the whole ego thing that can help us get there or here. You know what I mean, right? But stay with me. Before I dig any further into my thoughts on the matter, I would like to take the opportunity today to share some more from Leonard Jacobson and Alan Watts, who was kind of our sneak-on special guest this month. He was not in the plan, but he's made a presence all throughout the month. In fact, I'm not even going to tell you my thoughts until next Sunday. Because after all, next week is the final talk in this series. And what better way is there to get y'all to come back than a cliffhanger this week? So if you want to know where I'm going with all of this, you got to come back. The thing I want to share with you starts on page 84 of Life Beyond the Ego. We humans feel more comfortable with the familiar. We prefer to remain with what we know. We have acquired our sense of identity over many years based on all our past experiences, which give us a sense of who we are and what our lives are all about. We are afraid of the unknown. And this is particularly true of the ego. The ego can only function in the world it knows. And the only world it knows is the world of the mind. It only knows past and future. It doesn't know presence. If you are to awaken, you will have to relax and embrace the unknown. It's not as scary as you or your ego might think. He says, several years ago at one of my Mount Madonna retreats, I guided the group into a very deep level of presence. After a while, one of the female students raised her hand. Her name was Diane. During the guided meditation, she had opened to a very deep level of presence, which was apparently too much for her ego. She was clearly agitated. I don't know who I am when I'm present, she cried. I was silent for a few moments. I wanted to let her experience fear of the unknown more fully. Who are you without past and future to define you? I asked. Who are you without your thoughts, ideas, opinions, and beliefs? Who are you when your mind is silent and fully present? I don't know, she replied. What's the answer? The most truthful answer is this, I said. I don't know who I am. I just am. She looked puzzled. Or you could say, I am the one who is looking out through these eyes. I am the one who is hearing through these ears. I am the one who is here now. I paused to allow her to let in what I was saying. Then you could ask, who is looking through those eyes? Who is hearing through those ears? Who is here now? The answer is, I am. At the deepest level of presence, that is who you are. It is the I am presence that is awakened in you. It is that dimension of you that is of this moment and only this moment. I'm not comfortable with that, she said. I need to know who I am. Okay. Then you have to go back into the mind and into your story, I responded. Then you can know who you are based on all your past experiences, including all the emotional traumas, limiting beliefs, judgments, and repressed feelings. There's no middle ground, she asked. No middle ground, I replied. She seemed to accept that. I then guided her once again into a deep level of presence. When I knew she'd arrived, I asked, are you present in this moment? Yes. Who is present? She said. I am. I am. The most powerful words we can say. Those two words can build or destroy ego. The choice is yours. Who is the great I am? God, of course. Last week during the Science of Mind study group, I had a very interesting conversation with someone who's new to our church. I had said that I didn't believe God was a man on a cloud with white flowing hair and a beard watching over all of us. And this person asked me what I thought was meant when the Bible said that we were made in the image and likeness of God. And that gave me pause. Because you see, I knew in that moment what I did not believe. And I knew what I did believe, but how could I explain in words that belief in a way that someone else might understand? And that's when the word nerd that lives in my brain stepped forward to save the day. And I'll tell you all about that right after I share this little bit from Alan Watts. You thought I forgot about him, right? In this other talk, I have shared this is the third different talk of his. This is called Ego Death Will Save the World. He said, see, our problem is we don't really know how to stop messing up the world. We've got something started and we see it's going in the wrong direction. And I think the difficulty is, to borrow an old Chinese saying, that when the wrong man uses the right means work the wrong way. In other words, there's something wrong with the way we think. And while that is there, everything we do will be a mess. Now, what is it that's wrong? Now, as far as I can see, the basic mistake is that we've invented this wonderful system of language and calculation, and that it is too simple to deal with the complexity of the world. And also that we are liable to confuse that system of symbols with the world itself, just as we confuse money with wealth. A lot of people are in business to make money instead of wealth. When they make the money, they don't know what to do with it. And so in the same way, we confuse happiness with status, and we confuse ourselves as living organisms, which are one with this whole universe, with something we call our personality. And what is our personality? Our personality is what we call our image of ourselves, and also our thought about ourselves, our idea of ourselves. This is the person, in other words. And it's what people meet and understand. And what I understand as Alan Watts is a big act, which is not really me, because the image of Alan Watts, in the image of Alan Watts, there are not all my unconscious processes, both psychological and physical. The construction of my brain is not contained in the concept Alan Watts. And the concept Alan Watts does not contain the inseparable relationships which I have with all the rest of the universe. And therefore, that concept is a fraud. And when it's mistaken for the real me, there's a confusion, because if somebody says to me, Alan Watts, do something about it, the concept Alan Watts can't do anything. In other words, because it's only a concept, you can't make it lift a weight. Just as with 3 as a concept, 3, the number, you can't make just plain 3 do anything all by itself. So also you can't wrap up parcels with the equator. It's a useful imaginary line, but it can't actually do anything. But we all feel that this concept of ourselves, which we call our personality or our ego, can do something because we think it really exists. So what has to happen is we have to come back to a sane view of our own life, which is the way we really are, an organism functioning in the terms of the whole environment, with the whole environment, instead of this funny little separate personality. But how are we going to do that? People say, oh, you can't change human nature overnight. You're asking us to give up the ego. That's the most difficult of all things to do. Actually, it isn't, because the ego doesn't exist. But of course, try to give up your ego with your ego. Then it'll take you to the end of time. Because this is the point. You can't transform yourself. You can't make yourself loving. You can't make yourself unselfish. And yet it's absolutely necessary that we be that way. It is absolutely necessary. If we are going to hand over the direction of nature to nature, which is what it comes down to, it's absolutely necessary that we let go of ourselves, and it can't be done. Not by anything we call doing it, acting, willing, or even just accepting things. You can't do it. Why? Because you don't really exist as that kind of a separate ego or personality. Stick with it. I know it's confusing. We're going somewhere. He says it's just an idea based on a phony feeling. So when it comes down to it, it's shocking news for us, for the human race, for our pride. You're only making a mess by trying to put things straight. They're trying to straighten out a wiggly world, and no wonder you're in trouble. So you can't do anything. You can't transform yourself, and what can you do? What happens then if you actually realize you've come to a dead end? And the human race has come to a dead end, in my opinion, he says. What then? Or is there something else? What happens when you just wait? There's nothing you can do. You watch, and all you see is what goes on that is happening of itself. You are breathing, the wind is blowing, the trees are waving, your blood is circulating, your nerves are tingling. It's all going on by itself, but you know, that's you. That's the real you, the you that goes on of itself. It's not the symbol, not the person. It's you that's happening, just as when you breathe. Yes, you can get the feeling that I am breathing by shoving your breath, but your breath goes on day in and day out without you doing anything about it or even thinking about it. The same way your brain is functioning without you forcing it. So your idea of you comes to a dead end, and we are individually and socially now at a dead end. This is the moment of which it is said man's extremity is God's opportunity, because we have to stop. And when we stop, we find a world that is happening rather than being done, being shoved. And that happening, as distinct from doing, is our fundamental self. And our fundamental self is not something just inside the skin. It's everything around us with which we connect. When you look out of your eyes at nature happening out there, you're looking at you. I'm not going to say what we should do from then on, but simply that before we think of doing anything in this critical situation that is the state of the world, we realize the completely illusory nature of the beings that we think we are and get back again to the beings that we really are, which includes all this outside world no longer left outside. So for Alan Watts, it's this construct of words and numbers which helped propagate this egocentric way of living, completely removed from being. And he says that you can't take steps to achieve the suspension or separation from ego. And that makes sense. I mean, there are plenty of things that we can do to walk toward that separation, right? We can give to charity, we can volunteer to help whenever life moves us into the pathway of something which needs help. We can do that whole rigorous weekly exercise that I gave you. We can make amends with everyone we've held even the remotest bit of an uneven mental scale about. You know what I mean by that, right? That scale of who owes who for what affront or slight or hurt. We can work to balance all of those. We can rescue animals and devote our lives to acts of altruism. We can do all manner of doings and yet never get away from that pesky ego. But why? If you believe that there are specific steps you are supposed to take to attain the goal of permanently silencing ego, that there's a specific formula through which every one of us can attain enlightenment, and if you are taking these said specific steps, no matter how diligently and determinedly you try, you are at every single moment of every single part of that endeavor working directly from ego. You are behaving with want, with a goal, with your eye on the prize, trying to conquer, achieve, and obtain. And that's all ego. And I have to agree with him that language is a big part of the problem. But today, I'm hopeful that the word nerd living inside of me that I mentioned can make language part of the solution. When you say the word image, what do you think? Something you see, right? Period. And that's sort of true. It's sort of true. According to Oxford Languages, the definition of image is as follows: a representation of the external form of a person or thing in art, as in her work juxtaposed images from serious and popular art. And the second definition is the general impression that a person, organization, or product presents to the public, as in she strives to project an image of youth. And everyone we've heard of says that our ego is the image we project into the world in order to make everyone think we're whatever we made up our mind that we want to be, right? These two definitions certainly speak to that idea of making us look the way we want to look. That is our image. Putting something out in art or personal presentation which represents our thoughts. And our thoughts are exactly the key here. We were made in the image and likeness of God. We were made by God's thoughts. We and everything else that has ever been were imagined by God. Or in the context of this explanation, God's thoughts formed our image. Okay, Gina, that's well and good, right? God thunk us, and so we are. What is your point? Thank you for asking. Now, we know that according to the gospel, according to John, chapter 1, verse 1, in the beginning there was the Word. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So God spoke and made us. Out of what? Because it doesn't say in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And there was also this other stuff laying around outside of God that came from somewhere besides God, and God used that mystery stuff outside of God to make us, although we have no idea how that mystery stuff outside of God got there in the first place, but we're choosing to ignore that. Because if we think that far into things, we'll have to take a deeper look than the words we were given on the page. No, in the beginning, there was the Word. And the Word was with God. And the Word was God. God thought, or divine mind, and Word. And so we were made by divine mind out of divine body. We are not made like God. What we are made out of is God. We are alike in substance, or you could say we were made out of the likeness of God. God made us out of God. And so when you're contemplating all of the great many ways you might approach moving away from ego and toward awakening, catch that contemplating ego mind when it's running. Tell it to stop, and then remind it who you really are. You are God's perfect dream, the product of God's most wonderful thoughts, and made entirely out of God. We all are. We don't need to remove ego from our existence. We need to keep reminding ourselves the facts of who we are, the real us. And there is no ego in that. We are made perfect by perfection of perfection. Everything else is just noise. Chant that. Meditate it, sing it, laugh it, scream it if you have to, but most of all, remember it. Remember the truth of yourself, who you really are, not this. Because when you finally and fully remembered and embraced who you've always been, there's no further journey. There are no steps to take toward enlightenment. Because you've awakened from the dream and you're here in eternity. Welcome home. Thank you.